The Road to Dodge, From the Raven, Revenge, and the Reckoning. The sky was barely pink when I swung my legs over the side of the bed and felt the floor under me. Cool, steady, real. I sat there for a breath, listening. No gunfire, no screaming, no clatter of hooves over dry brush, just the soft creak of the house settling and the faint rustle of wind through cottonwoods outside. For once, I didn't feel like I had to reach for a weapon. I just stood, slow and solid, and pulled on my boots. My ribs still ached, but less than they had. The jaw moved clean. That quiet war inside me, vengeance, regret, shame, had settled into something more like stillness. Not peace exactly, but close enough to walk on. I cared about this place now. About the girl upstairs with the bright eyes and stubborn jaw. About the woman in the kitchen who carried the whole world on her shoulders without flinching. About the land, rough and ragged, but growing something strong. I stepped out into the yard. Steam curled off the grass. The sun was lifting over the ridge, spilling gold over the roof of the barn. The smell of horses and brewing coffee hit me like a memory of something I'd never had, but always needed. Mara had already put the coffee on. I found the tin mug by the stove and filled it. The warmth spread through my hands like something holy. Down at the corral, the day had started in earnest. Sam Crow was already out, his hat low, arm lifted, waving the remuda in from the far end. Bill Puck moved with quiet precision, opening the gate. Jess Rudabaugh was laughing at something Jed said, both of them working the line clean. Dust kicked up around the horses' hooves, swirling in the sun like smoke. Bobby and Jimmy were by the tack shed, checking girths and cinches. Johnny had a bridle in his teeth, hands full with a bucking sorrel. Teddy was elbow-deep in saddle soap, cussing softly. Lazarus stood nearby, one hand on a crate of supplies, chewing something and watching it all like he'd seen this show before. I sipped my coffee, leaned against the post, and let it settle over me. The sound of men working, the rhythm of the morning, the quiet thud of hooves, the creak of leather. This was it. This was the day. And for the first time in a long damn while, I was ready for it. Mara had breakfast going before the dust even settled. She hollered from the porch, her voice carrying over the yard like a bell. "Come and get it before I throw it out to the coyotes." I followed the scent before I followed the sound. Bacon, potatoes, coffee strong enough to float a nail. Instead of bringing everyone inside, Mara had set the table out under the awning, long planks laid across sawhorses with a checkered cloth clipped down tight against the breeze. She moved between the house and the table like she'd been running chuck wagon lines her whole life, iron skillet in one hand, plate of eggs in the other. "Lottie," she called, "get the mugs and the salt." "I already did," the girl yelled back from the steps, bouncing like a foal that smelled the trail. The crew drifted up from the corral, dust on their boots, rope burn on their gloves, sun just starting to warm the crown of their hats. Sam scratched his beard and took a plate without a word. Bill Puck tipped his hat to Mara and poured himself coffee. Jess, Jed, and Lazarus fell into a rhythm like they'd done this a dozen times. Jimmy and Bobby started roughhousing until Teddy swatted them both with his hat. Mara set the last skillet down, potatoes fried crisp with onion and black pepper, and leaned back on her heels. "Eat while it's hot. You don't get a spread like this every morning on the trail." We stood around the table, passing plates, pouring coffee, leaning on one boot while we chewed. No one said much at first, just the scrape of forks and the occasional grunt of approval. Then Jess said, "So what's the plan for the first leg?" Sam nodded toward me. "He's foreman. Ask him." I took a sip of coffee. "We head out slow. Let the herd stretch. Keep 'em moving, but don't push 'em. We bed down just past the river crossing tonight, if the bridge holds." Mara wiped her hands on her apron. "It'll hold. Jerry rebuilt it last year with iron rods." Lottie looked up at me, eyes wide. "I get to ride out with the wagon?" "You ride up front with Mara," I said. "You fall behind, you stay with Lazarus." She beamed like I'd handed her a star. We started slow, just like we planned. Let the herd stretch, find its shape. No need to spook 2,000 head of longhorns before noon. The cows bawled as they moved, low and constant, like the sound of the earth groaning to life. Calves stuck close to their mamas, legs still a little knock-kneed. The older steers moved grudgingly, snorting dust, tails swishing. Horns clacked, hooves thudded, and the sound of it all, deep, wide, living, rippled through my chest like a drumline. The boys were scattered in a rhythm we drilled all week. Sam and Jess riding the point, easing the lead steers up the ridge. Bill and Jed worked the swing on either side, keeping the body tight. Jimmy and Bobby brought up the drag, whistling and whooping to keep the stragglers from turning back. Johnny and Teddy flanked, cutting off any runners with quiet grace. You couldn't hear much besides cattle and hooves and the occasional shout, but it didn't matter. We'd done our talking already. I rode the left swing, not far from the wagon. Lottie was upright in the saddle, gripping the horn with one hand, the reins with the other, determined as hell. Mara drove steady, her shoulders squared, her hat tilted low. She handled the reins like a pro, cutting just enough to avoid a rocky outcrop as the wagon creaked behind her. Dust stirred up and clung to everything: boots, coats, eyebrows, the kind of dust that crawls in your teeth and settles in your bones. But no one complained. We had a long way to go, 250 miles, 3 weeks if we were lucky. And this was only the first hour. The herd moved like water, not fast, but flowing, steady, endless, slow enough to count time by. A few young bulls got ornery near the rear, but Lazarus rode back and cracked his quirt sharp enough to bring order. The man didn't say much, but he rode like he'd been born in the saddle and raised by trail dust. We crossed the first creek by midday. Hooves splashed and mud sucked at the wagon wheels, but nothing stuck. The herd moved on, past the cottonwoods, up the ridge, into the wind. Ahead of us, sky, road, and 17 days of dust and sleep and grit. Behind us, everything that tried to kill us and didn't. And right now, we were moving. By late afternoon, the sun had gone gold and hard, throwing long shadows across the herd. The cows had started to settle, breathing slower, hooves quieter, heads low. The lead steers had found their rhythm, and even the calves had stopped bawling for a while. I rode up alongside the wagon. Mara had dust on her sleeves and lines around her eyes from squinting into the sun. "We ought to pull up soon," I said. "Herd's slowing, and the boys'll need rest." She nodded. "There's a creek bend up ahead with some shade. You thinking east of the bluff?" That's what I figured. I took a sip from my canteen and glanced toward the horizon. Ought to give the herd some breathing room. Water. Bit of graze. She pointed ahead. "I'll start turning the wagon that way." But as we crested the next rise, my gut tightened. There was already a fence cutting across the hollow. Fresh wire. New posts. Too damn clean to be government land. And worse, 3 riders were coming fast up the other side. They reached us before the herd hit the fence. The man in the lead had a sunburnt face, thick mustache, and a mean look, shotgun across the pommel. He looked itchy. I didn't like the look of it. "That's my field," he shouted, reining hard. "You ain't turning your goddamn cattle in there." I raised my hand, palm out. "Didn't see your markers. It's open on the map." "It was open last year. I fenced it off 2 months back. You bring 2,000 head over my grass, and I'll have nothing left come fall." His buddies flanked him, rifles on their saddles. 2 of our new hands started to reach for iron, green and hot with trail nerves. "Stand down," I snapped, loud and sharp. The kid named Johnny froze. Mara pulled up beside me, eyes steady. "We're just looking for a place to bed down for the night," she said. "No damage intended." The farmer shook his head, spitting in the dust. "That's easy for you to say. They trample that fence, and I'm out a month's labor." I slid off my horse slow, one hand still up. "I'll pay you," I said. $10 for one night's graze. You let us cut the fence, turn the cattle in, and in the morning we'll string it back tighter than it was." He muttered. "You break a post, you replace it." "We will." He jerked his chin, and the other men eased their hands off their rifles. "Fine, but I want it mended by sunup." I nodded. "Deal." We cut a section of the fence, slow and respectful. The herd rolled through like a river behind a broken dam, lowing, tired, grateful. Cowboys spread out like anchors, settling them. That night, we camped on leased ground under a sky filled with stars and the smell of warm grass. And Killian? He didn't shoot anybody. Not bad for day 1. Lazarus looked up from the coals, wiped his hands on a greasy cloth, and grinned. "Snake? Snake?" Lottie's nose wrinkled, eyes wide. "Caught 9 rattlers today," he said, tapping his skillet like a showman. "Skinned, cleaned, and diced up fine. Little onion, little spice, bit of tallow, rattlesnake stew, trail delicacy." Teddy raised a brow. "You didn't see fit to mention that before I took a bite?" Lazarus cackled. "You like it?" "Yeah," Teddy admitted. Tastes like chicken. Or frog legs, added Bobby, licking his fingers. Lottie hesitated, then scooped up a spoonful. Her mouth twisted, but she chewed, swallowed, and gave a little shrug. Not bad. That brought a laugh from the crew, low and warm and needed. It broke something open that moment. The day had been long and the trail ahead longer, but here, around this fire, we weren't strangers anymore. Just trail folk, dirty and tired and fed. Jess started in on a story about the time he tried to ride a mule through a saloon door in Wichita. Bill Puck threw in a one-liner that had everyone hollering. Sam called him a liar, and Teddy dared him to prove it next time through town. Even Mara smiled, chin on her palm, letting the smoke curl around her like a shawl. Lottie leaned against her shoulder and slowly drifted, her bowl still half full in her lap. Mara pulled it from her hands, set it aside, and tucked a blanket around her. The fire burned down to coals, flickering low and red in the dark. One by one, the cowboys peeled off, trailing toward the tall grass near the creek, bedrolls slung over shoulders, voices dimming into murmurs and yawns. Mara brushed the hair back from Lottie's forehead and guided her beneath the wagon, laying out their blankets side by side in the dust. The girl didn't protest, just curled up like a cat and was asleep in moments. Mara looked up, eyes catching mine across the firelight. "You don't have to sleep all the way over there," she said. "If something stirs the herd or the horses, I'd rather have you close." I didn't argue, just nodded, rolled out my blanket right between the fire and the wagon's rear wheel, halfway between Mara and whatever might come in the night. "Hell of a first day," she said, settling in. "Could have gone worse," I replied. She smiled, pulling the blanket to her chin. "You didn't shoot anyone." "That's what I said." For a moment, the only sounds were the huff of cattle in the distance, the creak of leather, and a late coyote yipping far off. I leaned back, hands behind my head, eyes on the stars. It was only the first night, but it felt like we belonged to something. The fire burned down to coals, flickering low and red in the dark. One by one, the cowboys peeled off, trailing toward the tall grass near the creek, bedrolls slung over shoulders, voices dimming into murmurs and yawns. Mara brushed the hair back from Lottie's forehead and guided her beneath the wagon, laying out their blankets side by side in the dust. The girl didn't protest, just curled up like a cat and was asleep in moments. Mara looked up, eyes catching mine across the firelight. "You don't have to sleep all the way over there," she said. "If something stirs the herd or the horses, I'd rather have you close." I didn't argue, just nodded, rolled out my blanket right between the fire and the wagon's rear wheel, halfway between Mara and whatever might come in the night. "Hell of a first day," she said, settling in. "Could have gone worse," I replied. She smiled, pulling the blanket to her chin. "You didn't shoot anyone." "That's what I said." For a moment, the only sounds were the huff of cattle in the distance, the creak of leather, and a late coyote yipping far off. I watched the embers shift, the red glow pulsing like a heartbeat in the dirt. "You sleepin'?" she asked. "Not yet." "You miss it? Being alone, I mean?" I thought a moment. Used to be, that's all I wanted. But now? Now I don't mind the company." She didn't reply, but she didn't need to. I heard the small smile in her exhale. We fell quiet. Sleep came slow, but easy. The next morning cracked wide with sun and sound. Cattle bawled, dust lifted, tails whipped. The air was full of motion. Men shouting, horses snorting, gear clanking. Sam yelled, "Run up the remuda into the rope corral." Lazarus was hollering about coffee. Lottie yawned loud and grinned as she climbed from under the wagon. We packed fast, ate faster. Just hard biscuits and black coffee today. The herd had to move. By mid-morning, we were rolling again. The drive stretched out like a long black ribbon through the plains. Dust rose high behind the herd. The sun was fierce, the air dry. But the day passed fast. That evening, we found a river bend wide enough to hold the herd. Cottonwoods leaned over the banks. The water was clean and ran sweet over stone. We camped there, cleaned the trail from our faces, soaked our boots, and let the cattle drink deep. At sunrise, we crossed the river. The herd splashed through, drivers hollering, horses kicking spray, water glinting like silver. Then the land dried out again, and the dust returned. 2 weeks passed in rhythm. Ride, rest, rise. The boys had blisters and sunburns. The herd grew lean and strong. We crossed flatlands, dry gullies, rolling hills. Lost one steer to a snake bite, one to a busted leg, but we had fresh steak that night. Now we were getting close. The trail was wearing thin, and Dodge was starting to smell like money. The prairie began to change. The grass thinned, more fences, telegraph poles, dirt ruts turning to hard-packed wagon roads. On the horizon, a spire of smoke lifted like a signal fire, and behind it, Dodge City waiting like a coiled promise. The herd moved slower now, dust choked and road-weary, but the air buzzed with energy, that edge of something coming to an end. 3 weeks in the saddle, and we were finally here. Keep 'em steady, I told Sam. I'll ride ahead with Mara. The morning sun cut through the smoke like a blade. Dodge smelled of rail grease, fried dough, same as ever. But there was a heaviness over us now, a quiet you could taste. We buried Bobby under a twisted oak on the edge of town, beside a weather-leaning church with chipped paint and a bell that hadn't rung in years. The preacher said a few words. Mara said nothing, just laid a hand on the wooden cross and stood still while the others took off their hats. Lottie cried behind her bandana. Killian kept one hand on her shoulder. He was a damn fool sometimes, Sam muttered after. But he was ours. That afternoon, MacIver came. The herd filled the west pens tight and restless, horns clacking, dust curling over the fences. He walked the line, spit twice, and pulled a ledger. I'll give you market value per head, he said, thumbing through the tally. Less 3 for the 2 busted rails on the east pen. And your lucky price went up last week, $5 a head. Myra didn't blink. You can take the rail off Lazarus's backside if you're short. MacIver looked up, met her eyes, and cracked the faintest smile. Fine, he said. I'll cover the rails myself. By sundown, the deal was done. A bank draft in Mara's satchel, each man handed a thick envelope tied with twine. Johnny whistled low, thumbing his share. Ain't never held this much money in my life. Teddy nodded. I reckon it's enough to make trouble in Texas. They packed light and rode out at dusk, headed south with nothing but their saddles, their pay, and that look men get when they're chasing something they can't name. The rest of us turned our eyes east, back toward the mule shoe, back toward home. They rode out of Dodge with the sun at their backs, the dust of the plains rising like a curtain behind them. The herd was gone. Bobby was buried. The pay was in their saddlebags, and the trail home stretched wide and golden before them. For the first time in weeks, the pace was easy. No horns to herd, no cattle to count. Just miles under hooves and wind on their faces. That first night out, they camped in a hollow beside a cottonwood creek. The stars sharp and scattered like pins across a blue-black sky. The fire burned low. The coffee was strong. And after everyone had eaten and settled, Mara stood and stretched. Walk with me? She asked. Killian looked up. Yeah. They didn't go far, just over the rise where the creek bent and the frogs sang low. The night was quiet, the kind that let your thoughts catch up to your body. It's strange, she said finally, how fast things change. A few months ago, I was drowning under this place. Now? Now? He asked. She looked over at him. Now I feel like maybe I'm not doing it alone. I didn't speak. I didn't have to. She reached out, slipped her fingers into my hand, and I let her. We walked a little farther like that, then turned back toward camp. Lottie saw us coming through the dark. She didn't say a word, just smiled into the fire and tucked her knees up under her chin. She'd seen it, and she knew. They weren't just riding home anymore. They were heading somewhere,